Just out of curiosity, you said earlier that they had like something above 1,000 IPs that they were using. That would probably be like just a bunch of like VPSs, I assume.
So they were all over the world. If they weren't from one places, they were probably popped home accounts and things like that. These days, Murai botnet, which takes over home routers and whatnot, that's probably what it was.
Yeah, well, the question was, could you have just like blocked EC2 instances? But if it's home routers, I guess that makes it hard.
So 4 years ago, EC instances weren't a big thing. And knowledge of the IP ranges that Amazon, Azure and whatnot. So 4 years, that technology's moved a lot. Now it's prevalent. Back then it wasn't. Were they VPS instances? Hard to say. May or may not have been. We know that they never reused a single one of them. We know that they were all over the world. We saw ones from Australia, from the States, from Sweden, from Russia, from Ukraine. They were just everywhere. So difficult to block based on that.
Obviously, incidents happening with hospitals and other critical services are pretty scary. How often do you end up responding to instances of that sort of magnitude, be it just like size of compromised network or in the case of something like a hospital, extreme criticality?
So I've dealt with probably 1,000 incidents over the years. That was the largest one I've worked on. I ended up with myself and 2 other staff working on it. So effectively I did a lot of the analysis and legwork and had the other 2 guys, one reverse engineering and one helping with some scripting. I've managed and worked on probably another 4 or 5, which were not quite as big, but not that far behind. They weren't as complex. If you look at the ones that are out there now, typically the big ones are invariably ransomware. Toll, BlueScope, Norsk Hydro, so they go on. They're happening every single day. There seems to be another big one. Again, the complexity in that has moved from a technical complexity. Basically, you're immediately into recovery now with a ransomware event. It's how can we clean it up? Do we have backups? If we don't have backups, then how do we rebuild everything? But the complexity now has moved to that they're now exfiltrating as much data as they can before they encrypt. They're putting up websites naming and shaming, and they're just simply selling the data. So it's now become a data leak as well as an encryption one. Change in business model for the criminals there. Worked on another big one some months ago where the attacker, it was a supply chain attack. They came in through one of the, an associated business that was part of it. Came in through that and spread, and within, they were actually in the network for about 3 weeks. And it was really difficult to get rid of them. But the analysis of that one was the big issue in there was that because they'd underfunded cybersecurity for so long, really all of the items that I was talking about before, which was the staff awareness, the tools, the planning and preparation, there was none of it there. It wasn't only defense in depth, there was no defense at all. So that was just an accident waiting to happen. So does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
What we got? Yeah. So have any of you guys worked on incidents or CTFs where you've been pulling malware apart or anything like that?
I mean, I think the closest any of us have gotten is a couple of years ago, Saiska had a challenge where you were using a 2013 Android malware and doing memory forensics on it.
Mm-hmm. So memory forensics is becoming increasingly difficult. Intel's current, or Nextgen, I think it's current generation, they're going to have in-memory encryption. So volatility is your typical tool of choice to go and grab memory, but you won't be able to. And disks these days are moving to on-disk encryption. So basically each user space will be encrypted with separate keys, the whole lot. So even getting a disk image now is difficult. You used to get a disk image of a spinning disk, and you go back and you could recover all of the deleted files and everything. These days, the SSDs with their smarts, it's gone. You just never see it. So the forensics that we've traditionally done become increasingly difficult now with new technologies.
With that, do you reckon it's more? Do you reckon that's better for the end user, or probably more of a hindrance there? Because on the one hand, you're getting the added security, but also on the other hand, it makes, as you say, it makes recovery very, very hard.
So your average user probably has no concept of it. To me, if you could have it for sensitive environments where the issues of the classification of data and the ability to access it across security zones and things is more difficult, your average home user, so what? It's of really no consequence. And the majority of business users, again, you could say, okay, so finance, parts of finance, parts of payroll, perhaps the board. And after that, do you really need security measures like that? Become questionable. They certainly hinder the new techniques and tools there certainly hinder forensics, but does it give the user any extra value? Questionable. Most people on Facebook, they give everything away anyway, so.
I've got another question. When I was at EY, there was a lot of talk about the Nextgen SOC and using things like AI and machine learning for incident detection. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because some of my friends have thought it's brilliant and some of my friends have thought it's complete marketing.
Yeah, I'm with the latter group there. So the concept of an advanced SOC, an AI SOC, and all the rest of it have been around for probably at least 5 years, probably more like 7 or 8. And has it got anywhere? No. Is it going to get anywhere? So the problem you've got with all of these is you want to be in prevention. You don't want to be in detection. So by putting your effort into vulnerability management, asset knowledge, access controls, I talked before about being right of bang or left of bang. So bang is the event. On this particular one, it was 10:56 on the Thursday, the 14th of January, 4 years ago. Now, if they had some tools in place which limited the ability for a user to use privileged accounts, they were vulnerability management. Okay, we've got XP machines. XP machines cannot surf the net. They're only for end user tools to visit, view a PDF or whatever. And started thinking about it, the controls they can put in place to prevent the event, then we're getting there. A SOC and a SIEM are after the event. They can't stop an event. So again, you're right at bang. It's too late. The event's happened. So if we take a ransomware event in a data center now, from the time you've detected it till the time it's done its job, you are now talking minutes. With Maersk, so that was the big one from WannaCry. There was they had 70,000 machines encrypted hit in space of an hour or 2 hours. There was another one in the States with WannaCry that was hit. They had 4,500 machines, the same as the Royal, and they were all hit in less than 9 minutes. So your reaction time, I've got an advanced SOC, the AI on it takes time to analyze it. You've probably missed it and you've probably been encrypted. So yeah, I'm a bit cynical of it.
At risk of sounding like the only one that's out of the loop, hey Richard, can you just explain a little bit of what an AI SOC actually is? Okay.
I defer to Kevin on this.
So typically it's using AI techniques, machine learning. AI is typically machine learning. And these days, if you break it down, it's a lot of rules where they go through and it tends to be fairly rule-based. And it says, if I see this event and I correlate it with this one, and this happens and it's a privileged user, then I want to act differently to if it's a non-privileged user. So the AI, this theory about artificial intelligence, still is effectively machine learning, which is attempting to find detectable events in a massive large data. It's after the fact. Don't forget, it's still after the fact. So is AI ever going to be there? Yes, but I think we've still got a fair way before it will become effective in this space.
So I guess I'll ask a question like maybe which people have been wondering about, because you talked a lot today about the Royal Melbourne Hospital, but we thought they were going to say something about like Telstra, basically, because that's where you work at right now. So could you tell us anything about how your work there is?
Yeah, sure. So I work in the consulting team, which is client focused, and I'm out at customer sites quite a bit. With work from home at the moment, not so much. A lot of conference calls. So a typical work day for me, and I'll talk about the difference for the incident response, the internal team. So a typical day for me is at a customer site doing an assessment of some sort, or providing straight consulting on how they can improve their cybersecurity posture, what they can do, or working with them on an incident. They've had a small data breach on a website, sitting down with them, going through the log files so a possible data breach. And a lot of them, when you actually look at the log files and analyze it, they've dodged a bullet by luck more than anything else. So I'm very client focused. The difference is with the internal team are out Clayton, they're not too far from you guys. So the big cyclotron out there, so it's over the back of it, just in behind that. So that team, the incident response team is about 8 or 9. They're kept fairly busy by internal incidents with malware, with single person ransomware hits and various bits and pieces like that. So for me now, if I do an incident, I'm out there, I'll pick up a laptop, we'll do what's called chain of custody, so we get sign off, so we know where it is all the time. I'll bring it in, I might take a disk image of it, but I will typically pass that to the internal SOC who do the forensics on it. Sometimes I do it, but often now I give it to the internal team. The internal team then pick up that material, they'll do the analysis, they'll form an opinion, and then I go back to the customer and say, we need to do this to work on it. So internally, customer focused, we have two SOCs, two SOCs that Telstra sell services on. One was based on Apache Metron, quite a large install. It's now moved over to the Elk stack. So if you all know Elk, you would be quite familiar with that. That has machine learning smarts in behind it, which run monthly for picking up unusual events. So that's why I tend to be a bit cynical about AI and machine learning being able to help we've just had an incident. Most of it, you need a large set of data and some starting point, and you go back and retrospectively do an analysis on it. So we've got a couple of customer-facing SOCs that do that, and we have a number of internal-facing SOCs as well. So Telstra has SOCs for defence, for internal, for the major telco network, a couple of customer-facing ones. Common team, but different groups work on the different SOCs. So what's the total? The SecOps team covering SOC and IR would probably be 40, 50 people. Quite a decent sized team. That's 24/7. The customer focused ones are split Melbourne and Sydney. And you can hand off from one to the other. They've got big video screens and the whole lot. So the team depends on which team's on whichever day they're in one site or the other. The big SOCs that we've got, the telco oriented one is out at Clayton. There's another couple of big ones up in Canberra. Most of the SOC team actually work from Canberra. A lot of them do defence work, so they've all got clearances and all sorts of things. So it depends on where you work with, the skills you've got, and how it all hangs together for them. So does that answer your question there?
Yeah. I feel like me and definitely a lot of other people got a new insight into like Telstra, because I thought, oh, they just do like their telco stuff, but they
No,
also
that's
have customer facing. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the entire customer facing security team, there's just on 600 of us. So that covers what are there, about 20 of us do consulting. I specialise in the industrial systems. There's really 2 of us in that space Australia wide. So I get around Australia going to mines and coal yards and power stations and all sorts. Then we've got people who specialise in Palo Alto firewalls or Checkpoint or whatever. There's specialists, networking specialists, there's operating system specialists, there's software-defined networking, and it tends to be small teams of them. We've got pen testers, we've got red teamers. So yeah, it's a very diverse set of skills in the customer facing. So the team that work on the customer focus is now called Telstra Purple. So I'm in that we used to call BTS, now it's Telstra Purple. Telstra actually buys companies. Telstra actually is a large player in buying technology companies in Australia and the States. We've got one called Company 85 in England, in London, which was bought 3 years ago. And that's 100 people. At O2 Networks here in Australia, which was a startup telco that Telstra bought 6-7 years ago. What are some of the Redify, K-Cloud, and there's a few others and fairly specialist niche areas. So again, you've got a large group of very technical people, and we all talk to customers. And then you've got the internal ones which look after the enterprise, and then you've got the telco side of it. The telco side is probably 1/3 of Telstra. So yeah, it's a fairly interesting organisation, the way it's all split and separated.
I have a follow-up question, which I'm sure many of us in the audience will no doubt be interested in. If you're interested in getting into incident response, or maybe you can answer this for both incident response and wider cybersecurity, what sort of advice would you give to people who are in university?
CTFs are a good one. So that gives you a lot of insight into where to go for artifacts on a machine if you have an incident. So that's working with CTFs is always good. There are incident response CTFs. Don't always take the pen tester route of it's a capture the flag, but a lot of the IR ones, you're actually, rather than how many flags can I catch, it's what's the thread that this particular the attacker used, and where are all of the artifacts from that? How can I piece it all together? There's a couple of public ones of those. I'll have to find them up, and I'll see if I can send a link to some of those, which are quite a different style of CTF. Aside of that, so I'm a bit more, I used to be much more in the networking side. So I tend to, for me, an incident is a lot of network forensics over sysadmin type side of forensics. Simply, I can hide on a PC, but I can't hide on a network. So I find the network forensics more interesting. So understanding how the protocols work as opposed to how TCP works at the lowest level is going to be a good help there as well. How does SMTP work? So the email, when it comes in, what's the tricks? Here's an example on this one. I had an incident a number of years ago where the company had received an email from an individual making rash claims and things, and it had been sent as a BCC. And they said, can you find out how many people in the organisation received the email? Yes, that didn't quite, took me about 5 minutes. But again, it comes down, and I'll tell you the trick in a minute, it comes down to understanding the protocol, and a user who doesn't understand, in that case, the person at the far end went BCC, doesn't send the email address, doesn't send the list of people it goes to, therefore it'll be anonymous. What the person didn't realize was that every message has a message ID. So all you've got to do is search on the message ID in the logs and you've got them all. So that turned out to be a really quick, easy one. So things like that, understand the protocol as opposed to the TCP flags and what they all mean. It's useful, but the protocol is going to be more interesting. So a little bit more general, you need to know a reasonable amount of sysadmin, a reasonable amount of networking, a reasonable amount of how to calm a person down. If you're in an incident, the bosses, my rule of thumb is around 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through an incident, the executives will start hammering on the table and telling you what to do. So I know I'm getting fairly close to the end of an incident when they start jumping on the table. So you start being able to read people and understand a little bit of psychology about people. I taught at UTAS, University of Tasmania, in some security and user interface design, a few things 15 years ago. And I quite often still have students come up and say, I'm doing computer science, what subjects should I do? My recommendation is that you need in your mix of subjects, you want to have something on psychology and something on finance in there as well. A bit of law is really useful as well. Knowing what, how to react in the case of a data breach, and a little bit of law there is quite handy. So yes, you're doing computer science or the equivalent of cybersecurity, whatever it is, but some of the other ones are really useful. Now, psychology is useful for being able to understand, okay, so the manager is doing this, what's behind it for them? They don't want to lose face and all the rest of it, but if you have a bit of an understanding from a raw psychology from Maslow and all the rest of it, it'll give you a better feeling for why they're doing things. So what other skills? Nothing really stands out as, so I've grown into incident response over many years of being able to sort of jump in and fix things. And that's helped. So I'm now more of a generalist than I am a specialist in any one particular field. I guess you could call me a specialist in cybersecurity, but that's really for me a wide field anyway. So yeah, a bit of everything. You need to be able to do a bit of sysadmin. Networking's good as your friend. CTFs so that you know where to look for things. Be inquisitive. You know, the bad guys are going to do things. Why are the bad guys doing it? Is what we think bad, is that what they think's bad? And the answer is no. For them, it's a business. So they make decisions based on business rationale of what's the easiest, quickest, cheapest way to do it. So how do we counter that and make it more difficult? The defense in depth, making the network just harder to get to, makes it harder for them to do things. So you can do things like that. You can consider it from that point of view as well. Does that answer?
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I had just one more question.
Sure.
You're in the industrial sort of networking now, right?
So I work in industrial systems so I looked after power systems for a while for a power utility. Looked after the SCADA environment. I've built SCADA systems. I've built, I mean, literally we needed back in the 80s when I started in that space, the equipment that you can buy now, you couldn't really buy then. So we were designing our own circuit boards to do particular things, writing the software for them, the whole lot. So the world's moved on. There's a lot of easier ways of doing it now. Internet of Things with the little devices, we would have, I mean, yeah, it would have made life so much easier back then. So specialize in that. The protocols in use on most industrial systems are fairly simplistic. They tend to be lightweight. They tend to be very latency sensitive. So understanding that gives you a different feeling for the way protocols work. So your internet protocols are designed to, you know, be interruptible and still recover. An industrial system, much less so. So, you know, if I say I want this piece of information to get out of that power station, it has to get there. So knowing that it's actually deliverable is a fairly important feature of it.
Okay, so how did you get like experience in like these very specialized systems? Is it like every power station has their own set of protocols that you have to understand when you get there, or is it a kind of like?
So in the industrial space, there's probably hundreds of protocols. In Australia, the reality is there's a handful of them which are popular. DMP3, Modbus, those would be the two that are right up there. There's a few others. So in building management systems, so I've in 242 Exhibition Street, which is my office in Melbourne, where I work, like every big building like that, they have a building management system, which is just a SCADA system, and it looks after the power, the lights, the lifts, the environmental controls, the car parking, all of that. And you can look on the screens, and it's just like a SCADA system, only you're looking at different information. They tend to use a couple of very basic protocols. Pretty much virtually none of the protocols in use in industrial or building management system have authentication or encryption on them. So they're all very simple, very simple, and some of them are bit oriented as well. So the power system for the power station that I worked on, we had 26 power stations, and every 4 seconds we'd do an update to all of them, and an update telling you to turn a generator on or change the power rating on it might be a total of 30 bits, 40 bits of information. So 9600 baud is still commonly used in that space. Again, it's protocols in the way that.
I think you muted.
There we go, unmuted. But yeah, protocols in industrial space tend to be very lightweight, no encryption, no authentication. It's starting to occur now, but yeah, not a lot.
So how did you get your like first experience with it? Was it just you got in the game early in regards to these and everything was very easy to understand, or was it just like you had to learn on the job as you went to get into these industrial systems?
My first job, I was in the Air Force for 8 years. I finished in the Air Force. The next job I got was for a company that did commercial systems and did industrial systems. And I'd been trained as a network engineer, and also had grounding in good engineering, how to work a lathe, how to weld and all that sort of stuff. So they said, oh, well, you can work in this side here. So my first system was building a batching system for a big cement plant. Had to build the hardware. We bought a PC, it was called a Hewlett-Packard HP85, which had a little screen, a little printer, and a magnetic tape. And that was what we used for programming. That was about a 3 or 4 month job to program that. From there, moved on to building other SCADA, what we now call a SCADA system, built using different things, but really learned on the path as I went through it. So now there was computer science and it was really programming was the key thing. There was nothing that you'd now call an architect, didn't exist. Security didn't exist. Electrical engineers did a lot of the work, and you just picked it up as you went. So how it's changed now, it's a much more complex field now, and you really got to have the qualifications in the different parts of it. Your pickup time to just come from nowhere to become proficient would be so difficult. So the courses that you guys are all doing, valuable. Where you end up and being able to use those for which particular field within the overall sphere gamut of either industrial or commercial or cybersecurity or anything else, that's where you start learning the bits and pieces on the way through that you need specific for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, people seem to have run out of questions indeed. Thank you very much, Kevin, for your time and answering all these questions, giving us all your insight. It's really quite different from what we get to experience usually. Thank you, everyone who came to this workshop. As always, make sure to fill in your attendance and join the club if you haven't, to make sure that the club keeps growing and being good. So we have a chat where we talk about various cybersecurity news and stuff like that. We also play CTFs. So as Kevin mentioned, that's a good way of learning about how the attacker thinks and like what to look for in what could possibly be stolen. And I also would like if you guys could fill out the survey, which I linked as well, so you can give feedback on this workshop so we know if we can improve and how so. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, that's it from me.